The asphalt behind the Casey's General Store on East 31st was wet from a midnight rain, and I was 49 years old when I parked my 2008 Ford F-150 behind the dumpsters and tried to sleep with a rolled-up jacket pressed against the cold window. Fired. Wife gone. Kids taken. House sold to cover the lawyer's fees that didn't even save it. I had $11 in my wallet, a quarter tank of gas, and a homeless man in a faded green army jacket watching me from a bus stop bench across the lot who had no business knowing what he knew about my father. I had no idea that the 4 words he was about to whisper through my cracked driver's side window were going to undo every lie my mother had told me for 49 years. If you have ever crawled into the back of your own truck on a Tuesday night and wondered how a grown man becomes invisible to the people who used to need him, you need to hear what happened in the next 72 hours. Because what happened to me in Tulsa, Oklahoma between October 22nd and October 25th of 2025 was not the end of my life. It was the moment I found out I had been living someone else's. My name is Wade Calloway. I was born in 1976 in a hospital in Joplin, Missouri, to Lorraine and Donovan Calloway, or so the birth certificate read. I grew up in a single-story ranch house on the wrong side of Range Line Road. My father worked at the rail yard for 28 years and died of a heart attack in our garage in 2003 when I was 27. My mother passed 7 years later, brain aneurysm, 61 years old, no warning. By the time I was 35, I was already an orphan and didn't think twice about it. That is what I thought I was. An orphan with no extended family, no inheritance, no story worth telling. I married Shelby Wren in 2007. We met at a community college accounting class she was taking for fun and I was taking because my boss told me a foreman ought to know how to read a balance sheet. She was 23. I was 31. She had honey-colored hair and a laugh that made the whole back row of the classroom turn around. We had Totham in 2010 and Briggs in 2013. I worked construction my whole life. Started as a framer at 19, worked up to crew foreman at a residential builder in Tulsa called Stoneridge Homes. 22 years of hammers and saw blades and being the first man on site and the last man off. I had thick forearms, sunburned shoulders, a permanent grease line under my fingernails that no amount of scrubbing ever pulled out, and a paycheck that put food on a table and a roof over the heads of 2 kids who used to climb on me when I came through the door at 6 in the evening. I was not rich. I was not poor. I was a man who had a small life that he loved. Then in March of 2024, Stoneridge Homes filed Chapter 11. The owner, a man named Royce Tinsley, who I had known for 15 years, called the foreman into the back warehouse and told us, with tears in his eyes that I now understand were the tears of a man already planning to walk away with his second wife and a duffel bag of cash, that the company was being absorbed by a corporate builder out of Dallas and that none of our positions would survive the transition. He hugged me. He said he was sorry. He gave me 4 weeks of severance and a letter of recommendation on Stoneridge letterhead. Then he flew to Costa Rica. The corporate builder out of Dallas, the one that was supposed to absorb us, turned out not to exist. I was 48 years old. I had been a foreman for 14 of those years. I had a mortgage of $1,840 a month, 2 car payments, a daughter starting freshman year of high school, and a son in middle school who had just made the travel baseball team. And I had in the bank $3,400 and a wife who was about to find out that the man she had married was not as steady as she had been promised he would be. That is where the falling started. The homeless man on the bench was still 18 months away. And the manila envelope my mother had hidden in her cedar chest in 1976, the one I would not lay eyes on until day 3 of this story, had been waiting in a self-storage unit in Carthage, Missouri, for the entire 49 years of my life. The first 6 months without Stoneridge taught me what kind of man I was when nobody was paying me to be one. I picked up day labor through a temp agency on South Sheridan that paid $12 an hour cash for jobs no licensed crew would touch. Tear-outs in flood-damaged houses. Hauling shingles off roofs in August heat that climbed past 104. Cleaning out a hoarder's basement in Broken Arrow that took 3 of us 9 hours, and a respirator I bought with my own money. I came home every night with my back locked up, my hands shaking from the vibrations of a demo hammer, and a check for $96 before taxes that the agency took its cut out of before I ever saw it. Shelby would meet me at the door with a smile that got tighter every week. She would ask me how the day went. I would tell her it went fine. We were both lying and we both knew it. By August of 2024, the mortgage was 2 months behind. By October, 3. By Christmas, I had sold my framing nailer, my chop saw, my pressure washer, and the toolbox my father had given me when I turned 18. The toolbox was the hardest one. It was a red Craftsman with a sticker on the lid that read Callaway in my dad's handwriting from 1994. I sold it for $60 to a man at a pawn shop on Admiral Place who didn't even look up when I slid it across the counter. I sat in my truck in the parking lot for a long time after that. I did not cry. Wade Callaway does not cry in pawn shop parking lots. I just sat there feeling the particular weight of a man who has handed over the last physical object that connected him to the father he had buried 21 years earlier, and I drove home with $60 in my pocket and the radio off. Shelby filed for separation in February of 2025. She did not call it divorce yet. She called it space. She said she needed time to think about what kind of future we had. She moved into her sister Marlena's house in Owasso with Totham and Briggs and a U-Haul I helped her pack because that is what a man does even when his wife is leaving him. Marlena's husband, a real estate appraiser named Curtis Haverson, met me at the door of their house when I delivered the last load. He shook my hand. He told me he was sorry. Then he shut the door and locked it, and I heard, through the glass, my 14-year-old daughter Totham ask her mother in a voice she did not know I could hear, "Is Dad going to be okay?" Shelby's answer was the answer that ended my marriage in my head before any judge ever signed the papers. "Your dad has always been okay at the bottom, baby. He just doesn't know how to be okay anywhere else." I drove home. I did not stop at a bar. I did not stop at a friend's house. I drove home to a 4-bedroom house in a subdivision called Willow Bend that I could no longer afford, and I sat on the living room floor because the couch had been sold the week before, and I stared at the wall for 3 hours without moving. The divorce papers came in May. The foreclosure notice came in July. The eviction date was set for September 30th. I rented a storage unit on the south side of Tulsa for $69 a month, and I put what I could not bear to sell into it. Photo albums. The Christmas ornaments Totham had made out of popsicle sticks. A baseball Briggs had hit for a triple in his first travel tournament. My father's old work boots that I had kept in the back of the closet for 22 years for reasons I could not articulate. I padlocked the unit on September 28th. I drove away on September 30th in a 2008 Ford F-150 with everything I had not put in storage piled in the bed under a blue tarp. For the first 3 weeks of October 2025, I slept in that truck. Truck stops, Walmart parking lots, the back of a Casey's General Store on East 31st when I could not stand the noise of the highway. And on the night of October 22nd at 11:43 in the evening, I parked behind that Casey's, and I did not know that the man on the bus stop bench across the lot had been waiting for me for 2 days. The bus stop bench sat under a buzzing sodium light that turned everything the color of old butter, and the man on it had a green army jacket zipped to his chin, a gray beard that hung down past his collarbone, and a canvas duffel bag at his feet that looked like it had been carried through 3 decades of weather. I noticed him because there had been no bus running East 31st since the route was cut back in 2019, and a man sitting at a dead bus stop at 11:43 on a Tuesday night is a man who has chosen that bench for a reason that has nothing to do with transportation. I had backed my truck in so the tailgate faced the dumpsters and the cab faced the lot. He was sitting maybe 40 feet away, directly in my sightline, and when I cracked the window an inch to let the heat off the engine bleed out, I caught him watching me the way a man watches something he has been told to look for. I locked the doors. I am not a paranoid man, but a man sleeping in his truck behind a gas station learns very quickly that the world contains people who will take what little you have left if you do not pay attention. I reached under the driver's seat and pulled out the framing hammer I had kept back when I sold off the rest of my tools. I laid it on the passenger seat where I could grab it without thinking. Then I tilted the seat back as far as the cab allowed, pulled my jacket up over my chest, and tried to sleep with one eye on the bus stop bench. He did not move for 2 hours. I know because I checked the clock on the dash every 15 minutes. He just sat there with his hands folded in his lap watching my truck like it was a television set tuned to a program he had been waiting his whole life to see. At 1:58 in the morning, he stood up. He picked up his duffel bag. He walked across the parking lot in a slow, steady line that did not waver, came around to the driver's side of my truck, and stopped about 3 feet from the door. I had the hammer in my right hand under the jacket. I had the window cracked an inch. My heart was hammering against my ribs the way it used to when I was 20 years old and walking out of a bar in the wrong neighborhood. He did not knock. He did not raise his voice. He just bent down slightly so his mouth was level with the gap in the window, and he whispered 4 words in a voice that was rough but completely calm. "Your father isn't dead." Then he straightened up. He looked at me for another long second through the glass, and he walked away. North across the parking lot, past the air pumps, around the corner of the Casey's, and out of my sight. I sat there with the hammer in my hand and my mouth open. My father had died on a Wednesday afternoon in May of 2003. I had been the one who found him on the concrete floor of the garage next to a half-rebuilt carburetor for the 1972 Chevelle he had been restoring for 10 years. I had called the ambulance. I had ridden with the body to St. John's. I had identified him in a room that smelled of antiseptic. I had stood in a black suit at his graveside in the Ozark Memorial Gardens outside Joplin, while the pastor read from the book of Ecclesiastes, and my mother held my arm so hard her fingernails went through my shirt. Donovan Calloway was dead. He had been dead for 22 years. I knew this the way I knew my own name. I sat in the truck for another 20 minutes before I could get my hands to stop shaking enough to turn the key. I drove away from the Casey's. I did not know where I was going. I just drove. South on Sheridan, east on 51, past the Quick Trip on Memorial, past the all-night Waffle House where I had eaten my last hot meal 4 days earlier. I ended up in the parking lot of a 24-hour laundromat on East Admiral Place at 3:20 in the morning, and I sat there with the engine off and the windows fogging up, and I tried to make sense of 4 words that should not have been able to land on me the way they had. Your father isn't dead. A homeless man at a dead bus stop in Tulsa, Oklahoma, on a Tuesday night, had told me that the man I had buried at 27 years old was not in the ground I had stood over. He had not asked me for money. He had not asked me for food. He had told me one thing and walked away. And the part of me that wanted to dismiss him as a wandering lunatic could not get past the way he had said it. Not like a question, not like a guess. Like a man delivering a message he had been carrying for a long time. I did not sleep that night. I sat in the laundromat parking lot until the sun came up over the strip mall across the street, and I watched the orange light spread across the cracked asphalt, and I felt the first thing I had felt in 3 weeks that was not exhaustion or shame. I felt awake. I spent the next morning trying to convince myself the homeless man was nothing. I bought a sausage biscuit at a McDonald's on 11th Street with 3 of my $11. I sat in the corner booth by the window, and I ate it slowly because I did not know when the next meal was coming. I drank the free refills of coffee until the manager started looking at me. Then I walked out and sat in my truck in the parking lot, and I made a list in my head of everything I knew about the day my father died. He had been 51 years old. He had complained of chest tightness for 2 weeks before, but had refused to go to the doctor because the rail yard insurance had a deductible he did not want to pay. He had been alone in the garage. My mother had found him first, called me at the job site, and I had driven the 18 miles from Joplin to the house in 12 minutes. The ambulance was already there. The paramedics had been working on him for 9 minutes. They pronounced him at the scene. The funeral home was Pritchard and Sons on Main Street in Joplin. The viewing was closed casket because my mother had said the resuscitation efforts had left him looking like a stranger. I had not pushed back on that. I had been 27 years old. My mother had been 60. She had just lost her husband. If she wanted the casket closed, the casket was closed. I had not seen my father's body since the moment the paramedics zipped the bag. I sat in the McDonald's parking lot with that fact sitting in my chest like a stone. 22 years of grief, and the closest I had come to a physical confirmation was my mother's word in a sealed casket. I had never once questioned it. Why would I have? He was my father. She was my mother. Families do not lie about dead bodies. By noon, I had driven back to the Casey's on East 31st. The bus stop bench was empty. The duffel bag was gone. There was no sign anyone had ever been there. I went inside and asked the woman behind the counter, a heavy-set woman named Darlene with a name tag and a tired smile, if she had seen a man in an army jacket the night before. She said she had seen a lot of men in a lot of jackets. She asked if I wanted to buy anything. I bought a black coffee for $1.79 and walked back outside. I drove the strip from East 31st to Memorial to Admiral and back 4 times that afternoon. I watched every bus stop, every overpass, every patch of grass behind a strip mall where a man with a duffel bag might be sitting. I saw 2 homeless men. Neither of them was him. By 4 in the afternoon, I was running on a quarter tank that had dropped to an eighth, and I knew I had to stop driving or I was going to be sleeping next to my truck instead of in it. I pulled into the lot of a Family Dollar on East Pine. I cut the engine. I sat there with my hands on the wheel and I said out loud to no one, "He was a crazy old man. He said something crazy. Let it go." And that is when the second thing happened. A maroon Buick Park Avenue late 90s model, the kind of car a small-town funeral director drives, pulled into the parking spot directly to my left. The driver did not get out. He just sat there with the engine running, looking straight ahead through his windshield. I glanced over at him. He was an older man, maybe 70, white hair combed back, wire-frame glasses, a dark suit jacket. He turned his head slowly and looked at me through his driver's side window. He did not smile. He did not nod. He held up his right hand and pressed something flat against the glass so I could see it. It was a Polaroid photograph. Faded, the colors gone yellow with age. A man standing in front of a barn somewhere, wearing a flannel shirt and jeans, holding a baby in his arms. The man was maybe 30 years old. The baby was an infant, wrapped in a blue blanket. The man in the photograph was my father, not the version of my father I had buried in 2003. The version of my father I had seen in pictures from before I was born, thick brown hair, square jaw, the mole on his right cheekbone that I had inherited and that my son Briggs had inherited from me. The man in that Polaroid was Donovan Calloway in 1976 holding a baby. And the baby, if you knew what you were looking at, was wearing the same blue receiving blanket I had seen folded in the bottom of my mother's cedar chest my entire childhood. The old man in the Buick held the photograph against the glass for exactly 5 seconds. Then he lowered it. He put the car in reverse. He backed out of the parking spot, and he drove away east on Pine Street without ever rolling down his window or speaking a single word. I sat in my truck with my hands shaking, and I understood in that moment that whatever was happening to me had not started the night before at a bus stop. It had started in 1976 in a hospital in Joplin, Missouri, and someone had been waiting 49 years to tell me about it. I followed the Buick. I do not know why I expected to catch it. The old man had a 4-block head start, and I was driving a truck with bad alignment and a fuel gauge that was now sitting on a quarter of an eighth. But I pulled out of the Family Dollar lot, and I turned east on Pine, and I drove faster than I had driven in months, weaving past a delivery van and a woman in a minivan who laid on her horn as I cut across 2 lanes. The Buick was 3 blocks ahead, then 2. Then he turned left on Yale, and I lost him at a red light I could not run because a Tulsa police cruiser was sitting at the cross street watching traffic. By the time the light changed, the Buick was gone. I drove up and down Yale for 20 minutes. I checked every side street. Nothing. The maroon Buick Park Avenue had vanished the same way the homeless man had vanished, and I was left sitting at a Sonic drive-in with my hands on the wheel, and a photograph burned into my memory that I could not show to anyone. I drove back to the Casey's on East 31st. I do not know why. Maybe because it was the only place in Tulsa where something had happened to me that mattered. I parked in the same spot behind the dumpsters. I cut the engine. The sun was going down. The sodium light over the bus stop bench was just beginning to warm up. There was a manila envelope on the bench. I saw it the moment I turned my head. A standard manila envelope, the kind you buy at an office supply store for $2, lying on the wooden slats of the bench exactly where the homeless man had been sitting the night before. I got out of the truck slowly. I walked across the lot. The envelope had my name on it in black marker, not Wade, not W. Calloway, the full name. Wade Donovan Calloway. In a handwriting I did not recognize, I picked it up. It was heavier than it should have been for an envelope. Whatever was inside had weight and shape, papers, and something else. I looked around the parking lot. There was no one. The bus stop was empty. The Casey's was lit up like a normal Tulsa gas station on a Wednesday evening. A woman was pumping gas into a Hyundai at pump 3. A teenager was buying a Slurpee inside. No one was watching me. I took the envelope back to the truck. I locked the doors. I sat in the driver's seat with the envelope on my lap, and I looked at it for a long time before I worked up the nerve to open it. Inside were 3 things. The first was a photograph, larger than the Polaroid from the Buick. A 5x7 color print on glossy paper, the kind a professional studio would have produced. It showed a man and a woman standing on the porch of a two-story farmhouse with a wraparound porch and a green metal roof. The man was the same man from the Polaroid. Donovan Calloway, but younger, maybe 26 years old. The woman beside him was not my mother. She was a tall woman with dark hair pulled back, a pale yellow sundress, and a hand resting on the obvious curve of a pregnant belly. On the back of the photograph, in the same handwriting as the envelope, was a single line. May 1976. Ardwick Farm, Carthage, Missouri. The second thing was a key. Brass. Old. The kind of key that fits a deadbolt on a wooden door that has been hanging on its hinges since the Eisenhower administration. There was a paper tag tied to the key with a piece of twine. The tag had a name written on it. Unit 47. Beneath that, in smaller letters, Carthage Self-Storage, Highway 71. Carthage MO. The third thing was a folded letter, one page, typed on a typewriter with a ribbon that had skipped in places. I unfolded it with hands that were no longer steady. Wade. If you are reading this, then Holly's found you and Whitfield showed you the photograph, and you are sitting somewhere wondering whether to throw this envelope away or drive to Carthage. I cannot tell you what to do. I can only tell you that the woman who raised you was not the woman who gave birth to you, and the man you buried in 2003 was not the man whose name is on your birth certificate. Your father is alive. He has been alive for 49 years, and he has been waiting. The storage unit in Carthage was paid through the year 2030 by a trust set up in 1976. The key opens the door. What is inside the unit will explain what I cannot put in a letter that might be opened by the wrong person. Drive to Carthage, open the unit, then decide. The letter was not signed. I sat in the truck with the envelope in my lap and the key in my right hand and the photograph of the pregnant woman in the yellow sundress on the dashboard, and I felt the entire foundation of 49 years of my life shift beneath me the way the floor of a house shifts when the ground underneath it gives way. The woman who raised you was not the woman who gave birth to you. I read it again. I read it a third time. The words did not change. Lorraine Calloway, who had held my hand at my father's grave, who had sent me cards every birthday until the day she died, who had told me 1,000 times that I had her father's stubbornness and her mother's eyes, was not my mother. I looked at the photograph on the dashboard. The dark-haired woman in the yellow sundress looked back at me. Her hand on the belly that, if the date on the back was right, had been carrying me. I had 1/4 of a tank of gas. Carthage, Missouri was 112 miles northeast. I had $11 in my wallet. I started the truck. I made it to a Phillips 66 outside Veneta on the last fumes the F-150 had to give. I put $8 of regular into the tank and bought a bottle of water and a bag of peanuts with the remaining $3 and change. And I got back on Route 66, heading northeast at 9:14 in the evening, with my high beams cutting through a fog that had rolled in off the wheat fields. The radio did not work. The heater worked but cost gas, so I drove with the cold air leaking in through the cracked window and my jacket zipped to my chin, and the manila envelope on the passenger seat where the framing hammer had been the night before. I had moved the hammer to the floorboard. I did not think I would need it where I was going. I was wrong about that, but I would not find out for another 2 days. Carthage, Missouri at midnight is a town of 9,000 people that looks like it stopped growing in 1962. I drove past the courthouse on the square, a limestone building with a clock tower that was still keeping time, and I turned south on Highway 71 looking for the storage facility. I found it 3 miles outside town. Carthage Self-Storage. A long row of orange roll-up doors behind a chain-link fence with a code box on the gate. The letter had not mentioned a code. I sat in the truck looking at the gate and feeling the particular helplessness of a man who has driven 112 miles on a quarter tank of hope and is about to be stopped by a 4-digit number. Then I noticed the tag on the key. I had not looked at the back of it. I turned it over in the dome light. 4 digits were written there in pencil. 4719. The same as the unit number, then a 1 and a 9. I rolled down the window. I punched the numbers into the keypad. The gate slid open. I drove down the row counting unit numbers. 23, 31, 39, 47. I parked in front of it. I got out. The night was so quiet I could hear the click of the cooling truck engine behind me and the distant whistle of a freight train somewhere north of town. I knelt down in front of the door. The padlock was old, brass, a master lock that had been hanging on the hasp long enough that the finish had gone green with oxidation. I put the key in. It turned on the first try. I rolled the door up. The unit was 10 feet by 20. The light came on automatically when the door opened, a single bare bulb in the ceiling. Inside was not what I had expected. I had expected boxes, furniture under sheets, the accumulated artifacts of a life put in storage. What I saw instead was a workshop, a long workbench along the back wall, tools hung in pegboard outlines above it. A 1972 Chevrolet Chevelle on jack stands in the center of the unit, the hood up, the engine partially disassembled, the carburetor sitting on a clean shop rag on the fender like the man working on it had stepped out to use the bathroom and would be right back. I knew this car. I had grown up beside this car. My father had been restoring a 1972 Chevelle in our garage in Joplin for 10 years before he died. The same color, sunflower yellow with a black stripe. The same trim, the same chrome wheels he had spent 8 months tracking down at swap meets. This was the car I had found him next to on the concrete floor in May of 2003. This was that car. It was here, in a storage unit in Carthage, Missouri, 112 miles from the garage where I had buried him. I walked into the unit slowly. My boots made a hollow sound on the concrete floor. I went to the workbench. There were photographs taped to the pegboard, a dozen of them. The dark-haired woman in the yellow sundress, only older, holding a baby, walking with a toddler, standing on the porch of the same farmhouse from the 5x7. A boy of maybe 6 in another photograph riding a bicycle. A teenager, maybe 15, standing next to a four-wheeler with a fishing pole in his hand. A young man, maybe 20, in a graduation gown. It was me. Every photograph was of me. From an angle I had never been photographed from distances, from across fields. From parking lots. Someone had been taking pictures of my life for 49 years and pinning them to a pegboard in a storage unit in Carthage, Missouri. I felt my knees go. I sat down on a metal folding chair next to the workbench because my legs would not hold me up. I sat there for a long time looking at the photographs of myself I had never known were being taken, and I felt something I had not felt since the night Shelby drove away with my children. I felt watched, not in a bad way. In the way a child is watched by a parent who is not allowed to be in the room. There was a wooden cigar box on the workbench, cedar. The lid had been sanded smooth, and the words for Wade had been wood-burned into it in careful block letters. I picked it up with hands I could not control anymore. I opened it. Inside was a sealed envelope, an old leather wallet, a stack of legal documents bound with a rubber band, and a small velvet jewelry pouch that clinked when I picked it up. The wallet was my father's. I knew it the way you know a thing you have seen 1,000 times. Brown leather, worn smooth, the seam split along the bottom edge. I had watched him pull this wallet out of his back pocket every day for the first 27 years of my life. It was supposed to have been buried with him. My mother had told me she had put it in the casket before they closed it. It was here, in my hands, in a storage unit 112 miles from his grave. I opened it. There was a Missouri driver's license inside, recently issued, expiration date 2028, with my father's photograph on it. Older, gray, lined, but him, indisputably him. The name on the license was not Donovan Calloway. The name on the license was Donovan Ardwick, and the address listed was a rural route outside Carthage, Missouri. I sat in the metal folding chair under the bare bulb in Unit 47, and I held the driver's license of a dead man who was not dead and had never been Calloway, and I understood that the homeless man at the bus stop in Tulsa had not been lying to me. He had been the first honest voice I had heard in 22 years. I sat in that storage unit until the sun came up. I read every page of the legal documents in the cigar box. I read them twice. Then I read them a third time because my brain would not accept on the first 2 readings what the words on the paper actually said. The first document was a trust agreement dated June 14, 1976. The Ardwick Family Trust, established in the state of Missouri by a man named Calvin Ardwick of Carthage, Missouri. The beneficiary was listed as Wade Donovan Ardwick, infant, born May 3, 1976, at Mercy Hospital in Joplin. Initial funding of the trust was $1,200,000 in 1976 money. The trust was structured to grow untouched until the beneficiary either claimed it or the trustee determined the beneficiary had been informed of its existence. The trustee was a law firm in Springfield, Missouri called Haverson, Pell, and Whitfield. Whitfield, the same name on the tag the homeless man had worn around his neck. I had not noticed it the night before. I noticed it now because the second document, a letter on law firm letterhead dated 1976, listed the three founding partners: Owen Haverson, Marcus Pell, and Whitfield. The third document was a deed, Ardwick Farm, 270 acres on County Road BB outside Carthage, Missouri, held in trust for Wade Donovan Ardwick. Property tax records attached showed every year of taxes had been paid through 2025 by the trust. The current assessed value of the farm was listed at $2,600,000. The fourth document was a brokerage statement dated September 30th, 2025. The Ardwick Family Trust, total assets under management, after 49 years of compound growth and the addition of mineral rights royalties from a natural gas field discovered on the property in 1989. The number at the bottom of the page was $87,400,000. I read that number 4 times. I held the statement under the bare bulb in the storage unit. I checked the date. I checked the account number. I checked the name on the account. Wade Donovan Ardwick beneficiary. The number did not change. $87,400,000 had been sitting in a brokerage account in my name for 49 years, and I had been sleeping behind a Casey's General Store on East 31st in Tulsa with $11 in my wallet. I put the statement down. I picked up the sealed envelope from the bottom of the cigar box. My name was on the front, Wade Donovan Ardwick, in handwriting that I recognized now, even though I had not seen it in 22 years, my father's handwriting. The same handwriting that had written Callaway on the lid of the red Craftsman toolbox I had pawned for $60 8 months earlier. I opened the envelope. The letter was 3 pages long, handwritten on yellow legal paper. The date at the top was October 18th, 2025, 4 days before I had pulled into the Casey's lot. Son, if you are reading this, then Holly's got the message to you and you found the unit. I have been writing this letter for 49 years and rewriting it every time something changed. The version you are holding is the version I finished 4 days ago when Holly's called me and told me you were sleeping in your truck. I have been waiting a very long time to tell you the truth, and now I am running out of time, so I am going to tell it short and straight. Your mother was a woman named Iris Tarrant. She was 26 years old when she met me in 1975. I was 25. I was the only son of Calvin Ardwick, who owned the farm and the gas wells and the lumber yard on Garrison Avenue. Iris was working as a nurse at Mercy in Joplin. We were engaged in February of 1976. Iris was killed in a car accident on Route 71 north of Carthage on July 9, 1976, when you were 67 days old. A drunk driver named Harlan Callaway crossed the center line and hit her car head-on. She died at the scene. You were in a car seat in the back. You survived without a scratch. Harlan Callaway was killed in the same accident. He left behind a wife, Lorraine Callaway. I read that sentence 3 times, then I kept reading. My father did what grief makes men do. He could not look at you without seeing Iris. He could not raise you alone. My father, your grandfather Calvin Ardwick, was not a kind man. He wanted to send you to a boarding school in Connecticut and raise you to inherit the farm and the wells the way he had been raised. I would not let him. I made a deal with Lorraine Callaway. She had just lost her husband. She had no children. She wanted a child. I gave her you. I gave her enough money to move from Carthage to Joplin and start a life. I changed my name to Donovan Callaway with documents your grandfather paid lawyers to produce, and I lived with her as your father for 27 years. The man you grew up with was me. The name was a costume. The love was real. In May of 2003, I had a heart attack in the garage. I survived. The paramedics revived me on the way to the hospital. I had been planning to leave Lorraine for 2 years. I was already in love with another woman, a woman named Maroon who worked at the lumber yard in Carthage that my father had left me when he died in 1998. The heart attack gave me a reason to disappear. Lorraine and I had stopped loving each other a decade earlier. I paid her $300,000. She agreed to bury an empty casket and tell you I was dead. I went back to Carthage. I went back to being Donovan Ardwick. I married Maroon in 2005. I have a daughter named Sutton who is 19 years old and who is your half-sister. I am dying, Wade. I have stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctors give me 6 to 10 weeks. I have spent the last 22 years watching you from a distance because that was the deal I made with Lorraine and because I was a coward who could not face you. Holly's Whitfield is the son of the lawyer who set up the trust. He has worked for me for 20 years. He found you in Tulsa 2 weeks ago. I told him to give you the envelope when you hit bottom because I did not want you to come to me for the money. I wanted you to come to me because you wanted to know your father. The farm is on County Road BB, 8 miles east of town, the green metal roof. Come if you want to. Do not come if you do not. Either way, the trust is yours. The lawyers will release it the moment they verify your fingerprints against the ones on file from your birth records. I am sorry, Wade. I am so sorry. Dad. I sat on the concrete floor of Unit 47 with the letter in my hands, and I cried for the first time since I was 12 years old. I drove to County Road BB at 6:45 in the morning. The sun was just clearing the tree line. I had not slept. I had not eaten anything but a bag of peanuts in 14 hours. My eyes were red and my hands were not steady on the wheel, and I had the letter folded in my shirt pocket against my chest like a man carrying a piece of his own heart in his clothing. The farm was easy to find, 8 miles east of Carthage on a county road that turned to gravel after the 3rd mile. I came around a bend and there it was, the 2-story farmhouse from the photograph, the wraparound porch, the green metal roof, 270 acres of pasture and timber rolling out behind it. A barn off to the right with a sunflower yellow 1972 Chevelle parked in front of it, the hood down now, the engine apparently finished. I turned into the gravel drive. I parked in front of the porch. I sat in the truck for a long minute trying to make my legs work. There was a woman on the porch, tall, dark hair going silver at the temples, maybe my age. She was sitting on a porch swing holding a coffee cup, and when I got out of the truck she stood up and set the cup down on the railing, and she did not move toward me and she did not move away. She just stood there. "You must be Wade," she said. "Yes, ma'am. I'm Marin, your father's wife. He has been waiting for you since Tuesday." I climbed the porch steps. My boots were heavy. Each one felt like it weighed 40 pounds. Marin did not hug me. She put a hand on my forearm, gentle, the way a woman touches a horse she does not want to startle. "He's in the back bedroom. He has not been able to come downstairs for 3 weeks. I will take you up. Sutton is at the university. She drove down from Columbia yesterday, but she went into town to pick up his prescriptions. She wanted to be here when you got here, but he told her you might not come at all. She'll be back within the hour. He told you about me. He told me about you on our second date in 2004. There has never been a day in my marriage that I did not know I was married to a man who had another son. I have wanted to meet you for 21 years. She led me into the house. The front hall smelled like coffee and old wood and something else, something medicinal. There was a staircase to the left with a polished oak banister. We went up. The second floor had a long hallway with framed photographs on the wall. I did not look at them. I could not look at them. Marin stopped at a door at the end of the hall. She knocked once. She opened it. The bedroom was bright. A big window facing east, the morning sun coming in across a quilt that had been pulled up to the chest of the man in the bed. He was smaller than I remembered, thinner. His hair was almost completely white. The skin on his hands was pulled tight against the knuckles. But his eyes were the same eyes I had looked into across a breakfast table for 27 years. The same eyes I had inherited. The same eyes my son Briggs had inherited from me. He saw me. He tried to sit up and could not. He raised his right hand a few inches off the quilt. "Wade." "Hi, Dad." That was all I could get out. I crossed the room. I sat down in the chair beside the bed that Marin had pulled up for me without my noticing. I took his hand. It was warm. The bones felt like a bundle of dry sticks under the skin. "I am so sorry, son. I know. I should have come for you 22 years ago or never left or done 100 things different. I rehearsed this speech for 2 decades. I cannot remember any of it now. It's all right, Dad." We sat like that for a long time. He held my hand. I held his. Marin brought up 2 mugs of coffee and set them on the nightstand and left the room and closed the door behind her. The sun moved across the quilt. He told me about Iris, my real mother. He told me she had laughed at everything. He told me she had wanted to name me Wade after her grandfather, who had been a wheat farmer in Kansas. He told me she had held me for 67 days before the accident, and that the last thing she had said to him on the morning of July 9th, 1976, was that I had her eyes. He told me he had watched me play baseball in Joplin in 1991. He had been in the bleachers behind the third base line. He had worn a hat low over his face. I had hit a double in the 4th inning. He had cried on the drive home. He told me he had been at my wedding to Shelby in 2007, standing across the street in a rented suit. He had not come inside. He had not wanted to ruin the day. He told me he had been at his own funeral in 2003, in the back of the chapel, in a different suit. He had watched me carry his empty casket, and he had hated himself every step. I did not ask him why he had not come for me when Stonebridge went under, when Shelby left, when I started sleeping in my truck. I knew why. He had told me in the letter. He had wanted me to come because I wanted a father, not because I needed $87 million. He had let me hit the absolute bottom because he was a man who had been raised by Calvin Ardwick, and Calvin Ardwick had taught him that money does not heal a son. Only the son healing himself does that. He was wrong about most of it. He was wrong about leaving me for 22 years. He was wrong about the costume and the lie, but he was right about that one thing. I had needed to find my way to that gravel drive on my own. Around 9 in the morning, a car pulled up outside. A door slammed. Footsteps came up the porch and through the house and up the stairs, and a young woman burst into the bedroom with a paper bag from the pharmacy in her hand. She stopped in the doorway when she saw me. "You came," she said. She had my father's eyes. She had my eyes. She had the same mole on her right cheekbone that my son Briggs had on his. "You must be Sutton," I said. "You must be Wade." She crossed the room. She set the pharmacy bag down on the dresser. She put her arms around me without asking. And my 19-year-old half-sister, who I had not known existed until 11 hours earlier, held on to me like she was the one who had been looking for me for 49 years. My father died 11 days later on November 4th, 2025 at 4:17 in the morning. I was holding his right hand. Marin was holding his left. Sutton was at the foot of the bed with her head against the quilt. He went the way good men go when they have made their peace. Quiet. With breath getting longer and longer between each one until the next one did not come. The hospice nurse, a woman from Joplin named Glenda who had been driving out to the farm twice a day for 9 days, came in at 4:32 and closed his eyes and put her hand on my shoulder and said, "Take all the time you need." Then she left the room. We sat with him until the sun came up. The funeral was on November 8th at a Methodist church in Carthage. 240 people came. Lumber yard employees who had worked for him for 30 years. Neighbors, members of a Chevelle club he had quietly belonged to for 2 decades, the hospice nurses, a delegation from the law firm in Springfield, including a man named Hollis Whitfield, Jr., who walked up to me after the service and shook my hand and said, "I'm sorry it took me 49 years to deliver that envelope." Hollis was the man on the bus stop bench. Clean-shaven now, wearing a charcoal suit, his hair cut short. He was 62 years old and had been his father's apprentice since he was 24. I did not know what to say to him. I shook his hand. I told him thank you. He nodded. He said, "Your father was the best man I ever knew." He walked away. I buried my father next to Iris Tarrant in a small cemetery on the east end of the farm. Iris had been moved there in 1977 by my grandfather. There was a third headstone already cut and placed beside the two. It was waiting for me. I had not seen it until the day of the burial. Sutton walked me over to it. The name on the headstone read Wade Donovan Ardwick. The birth date was correct. The death date was blank. My father had paid for it in 2004 and had told the stonecutter to leave a space. "He wanted you to know there was always a place for you," Sutton said, "even when he could not bring you to it." I stood looking at the headstone with my own name on it, and I thought about the $11 in my wallet 3 weeks earlier, and the framing hammer on the floorboard of a truck behind a Casey's General Store, and the wife who had told my daughter through a closed door that I was always okay at the bottom. I thought about Roxanne. No, that was a different man's wife in a different man's story. I thought about Shelby. I thought about Tatum asking if I was going to be okay. I thought about my son Briggs, who was 12 years old and who had not seen me in 7 weeks because his mother had decided the visitation could wait until I had a permanent address. I thought about all of it, and then I let it go. Not the love, not the responsibility, just the weight, the verdict, the word worthless that had been written into me like a brand. I let it go in a cemetery on the east end of a farm I now owned, standing in front of a headstone with my real name on it, on a cold November morning with my half-sister's hand in mine. The reading of the will was on November 11th in the offices of Haverson, Pell, and Whitfield in Springfield. I drove there in a 2024 Chevy Silverado that Marin had given me the keys to on the morning after my father died. "He bought it for you in August," she had said. "He knew you needed a truck." The F-150 was still parked in front of the barn at the farm. I had not been able to bring myself to sell it. It had carried me to him. It had earned a quiet retirement on a pasture lot. The will was simple. The farm and the contents of the storage unit in Carthage went to me. The lumber yard on Garrison Avenue went to Sutton and Marin jointly, with a provision that the long-term general manager, a woman named Vella Crenshaw who had run it for 16 years, would remain in operational control. The brokerage account, $87,400,000 as of the date of death, came to me through the trust as the named beneficiary, with the understanding, written into a side letter my father had left for the lawyers, that I would do what I thought was right by Sutton and Marin and the people who had cared for him. I did not need the letter. I had already decided. I split the trust 3 ways within 48 hours of the reading. A third to Sutton in trust until she turned 25. A third to Marin outright. A third to me. My third was $29 million. It was more money than I would ever spend. The first thing I did was drive to Tulsa. I went to the storage unit on the south side. $69 a month. I paid 5 years of rent in advance and added a climate control upgrade so the photo albums and the popsicle stick ornaments and my father's old work boots and the things I had been unable to part with would not warp through another August. Then I drove to a Federal Credit Union on East 11th Street. I opened a college fund for Tatum and a college fund for Briggs, and I put $200,000 in each one. The accounts were structured so that Shelby could not touch them. Only the kids at age 18 for educational purposes. Then I drove to the pawn shop on Admiral Place. The red Craftsman toolbox with my father's handwriting on the lid was still on the back shelf. The price tag said $85. I paid the $85 and I carried it out to the new Silverado and I put it in the passenger seat and I drove east on Pine Street toward the suburb of Wasso where my children were living in a house that was not mine. I parked across the street from Marlena and Curtis Haverson's house at 3:47 on a Tuesday afternoon. The school bus came at 3:51. Tatum got off first. Then Briggs. They walked toward the house. Briggs saw the new truck. He stopped on the sidewalk. He squinted. He saw me through the windshield. He started running. Briggs hit the side of the truck like a kid who had been waiting 7 weeks to hit something, and I had the door open before he got to the handle, and he was in my arms with his face in my shoulder and his backpack still on, and his baseball cleats hanging off the strap because he had practiced that afternoon. Tatum stood on the sidewalk for a second longer than her brother. She was 14. She had been raised by her mother for the last 8 months to think of me as something less than I had been. She was holding her phone in her hand, and she was trying to decide whether to be cool about it. Then she gave up. She came across the street at a walk that turned into a run by the time she hit the curb, and she put her arms around me and Briggs together, and the 3 of us stood in the street in Wasso, Oklahoma on a Tuesday afternoon, and we did not say a single word for almost 2 minutes. Marlena came out of the house. She had a wooden spoon in her hand from whatever she had been cooking. She stopped on the porch when she saw us. She did not speak. She just turned around and went back inside and closed the door. I told my children a short version of the truth that afternoon, sitting on the tailgate of the new truck. I told them their grandfather had not been who I had always thought he was. I told them I had found my real father in Carthage, Missouri, and that he had passed away the week before, and that he had left me enough money that they would never have to worry about anything ever again. Tatum asked if it was real. I showed her the brokerage statement on my phone. Her eyes got wide, and then her eyes filled up, and she put her head against my shoulder, and she said, "Mom told us you were never going to be okay." "I know, baby, I know." She was wrong. She was doing the best she could with the man she thought she had married. She didn't know there was another man underneath. I didn't know either. Shelby called me that night. She had heard from Marlena. Her voice on the phone was a voice I had not heard in 2 years. Soft, careful. "Wade," she said, "I think we should talk. I want to apologize. I want to fix this. I think we made a mistake." I let her talk for a long time. I did not interrupt. When she was finished, I told her the truth, which was that I forgave her, because carrying that weight around for the rest of my life was a price I was not willing to pay, but that I was not coming back. I told her I would be a better father than I had ever been. I told her I would never miss another visitation. I told her I would be at every baseball game and every choir concert and every parent-teacher conference for the rest of my life. I told her the college funds were already set up and that I would be filing for joint custody the following Monday through a lawyer in Tulsa named Inga Marston who had already been retained. Then I told her something else. I told her that the word she had said to Tatum through a closed door in February, the one about me being okay at the bottom, had been the last sentence of our marriage. She did not argue. She said she understood. She wished me well. She hung up. I bought a small house in Midtown Tulsa in December, 3 bedrooms, a finished basement, a backyard with a maple tree the kids could climb. I did not need a mansion. I did not want one. I wanted a place my children could ride bikes to from school. The custody arrangement was finalized in February. Equal time, week on, week off. Briggs has his own room at my place now. Totham has hers. The walls are painted the colors they picked out at the Sherwin-Williams on Memorial Drive on a Saturday afternoon when we made a day of it. I drive out to Carthage every other weekend. Marin and Sutton are there. Sutton calls me on Sunday nights. We are still learning each other. She is studying veterinary medicine at Mizzou. She wants to be a large animal vet and come back to the farm. I told her the farm would be there whenever she was ready. The Chevelle is parked in the barn. I have started working on it on weekends. The carburetor is the same one my father was working on the day he had his heart attack in 2003. I am finishing what he started. I gave Hollis Whitfield a check for $500,000 in January. He tried to refuse it. I told him it was a finder's fee. He cried. A 62-year-old lawyer cried in the parking lot of a Cracker Barrel outside Springfield, Missouri. He took the check. I have not seen the old man in the maroon Buick Park Avenue since the day he held the Polaroid against his window in the Family Dollar parking lot on East Pine. Hollis told me his name was Marcus Pell. He was 81 years old. He had been my father's friend for 40 years. He had been driving around Tulsa for a week looking for me and had spotted my truck that afternoon. He had wanted to make sure I was the right man before Hollis approached me. Marcus Pell passed away in his sleep in March of 2026. I drove to his funeral. I sat in the back row in a black suit. I did not speak. I just nodded at his widow on my way out. I am 49 years old. I have been Wade Donovan Ardwick for 6 months now, on the legal documents and the new driver's license and the deed to the farm and the title to the truck. The man named Wade Calloway, who slept behind a Casey's General Store on East 31st in Tulsa with $11 in his wallet, does not exist anymore. He died in a storage unit in Carthage, Missouri on a cold morning in October, and a different man walked out of that unit into the sunrise. If you have been told you were worthless by the person who was supposed to know your worth best, I want you to hear me. Sometimes the people closest to you cannot see what is underneath. Sometimes a homeless man at a dead bus stop has been carrying the truth about your life in his pocket for 49 years. Sometimes the father you buried is not in the grave. Sometimes the inheritance is not the money. Sometimes the inheritance is just knowing, at long last, who you actually are. Drop a comment below if any part of this story landed in your chest. Tell me about the moment someone told you what you were worth and you finally stopped believing them. Hit the like button if a man who got back up after the bottom is worth a tap of your thumb. Share this with any man you know who has been written off by the people who were supposed to love him. Subscribe if you want to hear the next story, because there is always a next story and someone always sits down. The truck is still in the field. The booth is still open. And the stranger you have not met yet may be carrying the only sentence you need to hear.